For the presence before a face, my orientation toward the other can lose the avidity proper to the gaze only by turning into generosity, incapable of approaching the other with empty hands. The way in which the other presents themselves, exceeding the idea of the other in me, we here name the face. The face of the other at each moment destroys and overflows the plastic image it leaves me. The face brings a notion of truth, which is not the disclosure of an impersonal neuter, but expression. This quote, taken from the book Totality and Infinity, was written by the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas. He experienced firsthand the atrocities of that period, witnessing how the human being can be defaced and erased out of existence, reducing them to something less than human. Many members of Levinas's family were murdered in the Holocaust. Rather than see this as a circumstance unique to Nazi Germany, he observed that much of Western thought enacts a kind of violence through its abstract systems and depersonalizing technologies, leading to what he called totality. Totality is about reducing difference to sameness, of subsuming the singularity of the individual into a generality. However, Levinas wrote of a kind of phenomenon that resists totality, that calls forth and demands generosity, of responding with a receptive welcome and hospitality. Faces have this power to resist the impersonal. Faces express themselves by the vulnerability of their eyes, and not just their eyes, but the black pupils of their eyes. That point of the human face where I cannot see any further, but where I can experience myself being looked at by another. It is notable that when feeling shame or when avoiding a beggar on the streets, we find ourselves inclined to hide our face and to avoid looking at their face. What is it about faces that exerts this power over us? Why do they seem to hold a unique place in our perceptual experience? I will not begin to address such a question from a philosophical perspective, but we can consider the question in terms of cognition to see if there's any evidence for the claim that we experience human faces in a manner distinct from most other objects. In this video, we'll explore the topic of facial perception and facial recognition. To begin, it would be helpful to consider how we recognize most objects. If you recall in the previous video, we used feature detectors to recognize letters and words. However, one issue we didn't address, and that's important for three-dimensional objects, and especially faces, is how we recognize variations of the same object. For example, I can recognize a chair from multiple angles, front, side, or back. And I can recognize many different kinds of chairs despite a wide variety of designs. It's highly likely that when presented with a chair that has a design I've never seen before, that I'll still quickly recognize that object as a chair. This is only one kind of recognition, of taking a specific case and identifying it as belonging to a general category. There are other kinds of recognition. Another kind that identifies a unique object, not belonging to any larger category. When I head out to the parking lot after shopping and I search for my car, I'm not trying to recognize a car in general, or even a type of car like a Honda, Toyota, sedan, or SUV. I'm looking for my car, and there is only one object in this parking lot that can meet that criteria. In this situation, I'm not looking for those features my car has in common with other cars, but rather features that no other car has, such as the license plate, the particular scratches on my bumper, the object hung on my rearview mirror. These two forms of recognition are in fact quite different from a cognitive perspective. Let's first consider how we recognize objects as belonging to a general category. Look at this image. And what do you see? Do you see a cat? Most likely. And if so, what made you come to that conclusion? Since the act of recognition is usually fairly automatic, that may be a difficult question to answer at first and may require a little introspection. What about this image of a cat is essential for considering it to be a cat? You would probably focus on particular features, such as its ears, nose, whiskers, and tail. In other words, there are some essential features that need to be present for you to recognize an object. This is the central idea behind the recognition by components, or RBC model. The RBC model, like the feature detection models previously discussed, analyze objects in terms of their basic shapes and arrangements. These basic shapes in RBC model are what are called geometric ions, or geons for short. They serve as the basic building blocks for object recognition. These geons can be combined in a number of ways and are displayed in a defined pattern for specific kinds of objects. By requiring only a limited number of essential geons rather than to perceive the entire object, this allows us to recognize objects despite the angle we're seeing the object from. So whether I see the cat in front, on the side, or behind, I can still easily recognize the cat as a cat. This ability to recognize an object independent of any particular angle is what we call the viewpoint independent recognition. However, as mentioned, this is not the only kind of recognition. There is also the recognition of unique objects whose identity cannot be subsumed in some general category. One notable case is the individual human face. In contrast to ordinary objects, we are quite sensitive to variations of a person's face and can be thrown off when looking at a face from certain angles. This is what is called viewpoint-dependent recognition. One notable piece of evidence for distinguishing between objects and faces is found from a class of neurological deficits. Agnosia is a loss of the ability to recognize objects. There may be a difficulty in recognizing an object after having processed and assembled its features in the mind, as in the case of associative agnosia, or there may be difficulty in assembling the individual features in a recognizable manner, as in the case of apperceptive agnosia. You can assess the difference between these two kinds of agnosias using a relatively simple test. Present a client with a line drawing of an object, such as a key, and then ask them, what do they see? An individual with associative agnosia will not be able to say what they see. In other words, they won't recognize the depicted object. However, ask them to copy the object on a blank piece of paper, and they'll have no difficulty in doing this, despite still not recognizing what they're drawing. Now imagine another client, this time with apperceptive agnosia, and they're presented with a similar task. They also will not be able to name what they see. However, if you ask them to copy the object, like you did to the first client, they will have some notable difficulty in reproducing it, perhaps drawing its features in a disorganized manner. But if you ask that same client to draw a key from memory without any drawing of it present, they'll be able to perform this task. A couple of observations here. First, we can see the difference between perceiving features of objects and organizing those features into a whole. Second, we can see the difference between a recognition problem and a memory problem. Agnosia is not a difficulty in memory. It's a difficulty in connecting perception with a stored mental representation that's previously formed by memory. There's another kind of agnosia distinct from the two mentioned, called prosopagnosia, which is the inability to recognize individual human faces, even faces of people you know well, even your own face. Prosopagnosia can occur in the absence of the other agnosias mentioned previously. This term combines the words agnosia, which means without knowledge, agnosia, and the word prosopon, meaning mask, face, or person. The prosopon is the way the individual manifests themselves as an individual. It's with this condition of prosopagnosia we find a strong piece of evidence for the uniqueness of human faces from a cognitive perspective. Whereas damage to the what or ventral pathway can produce a visual agnosia, it is damage specifically to the fusiform gyrus of the temporal lobe, or what is called the fusiform face area, that is associated with prosopagnosia. Faces are special not only because there's a distinct brain region dedicated to them, but also because we seem to process faces differently than ordinary objects. Rather than analyzing its individual features, such as the geons mentioned before, we appear to process faces holistically. It's the face's overall configuration, the spacing of the eyes, the height of the forehead, the length of the nose, etc., that provides the necessary information to recognize someone. Even slight changes in the relation of these features can lead us to have trouble recognizing someone. This helps to explain the composite effect. Individuals asked to identify the top half of a face will have much more difficulty doing so when the bottom half is aligned that belongs to someone else's face. When the bottom half is removed, it then becomes easier to recognize who the individual is by just viewing the top half. This is because minds are inclined to process faces holistically. And so it's difficult for us to dissociate the top half from the bottom half unless the bottom half is removed for us. There remains debate here, as the fusiform gyrus may not solely be dedicated to processing faces. However, the uniqueness of processing faces has some support from an evolutionary perspective, given that our capacity for socializing is one of the unique elements of our species and seems to have been essential for survival of our ancestors who were otherwise pretty physically weak compared to many other animals. It would have made sense that we're especially attuned to the most socially relevant nonverbal information we encounter, and that is the face. Whatever cognitive neuroscience may end up showing with regards to the uniqueness of face perception and recognition, there can be little doubt about the power faces have over us. No matter how much we clothe ourselves, our faces, and certainly our eyes, remain naked and vulnerable. It's the place where our uniqueness shines forth most visibly. It's the place that places a demand on us to attend and respond with generosity. But the face is also what many systems seek to efface. In a world where people are reduced to a number, defined by a political label, or valued based upon their surplus value to an economy, we become alienated from the face, both our own as well as others. Thank you for watching. Please feel free to like this video, and if you want to see more, subscribe to this channel. I'll see you next time.